teleology considers nature as a kingdom of purposes. Morals regards a possible kingdom of purposes as a kingdom of nature. In the former, the kingdom of purposes is a theoretical idea for explaining what exists. In the latter, it is a practical idea for bringing about something that doesn't yet exist, but will become real through our conduct, in conformity with this very idea. Immanuel Kant. Kant recognizes that morality is not about some arbitrary rules of conduct. It's not about other people telling you what is proper, what is politically correct, restricting you. Nor is it even about some god up there in the clouds, some heavenly tyrant, giving you arbitrary commandments on what to do or not to do. But rather, the moral law is a law that reason gives itself. We have autonomy. We ourselves, if we are moral, if we think about what is good, what isn't good, what ought not to happen, we ourselves give ourselves a law. It is therefore a law of freedom, a law that, if we are moral, we want to follow, because we understand that it is the right thing. And reason speaks to us through the categorical imperative. What exactly the imperatives are, both the categorical imperative and also the hypothetical imperatives, I addressed in another lecture on the imperatives. And as for the categorical imperative, it can be expressed in three formulas. Now, it's important that it's always one and the same categorical imperative. So these three formulas are not different moral laws. They also don't contradict each other when it comes to what we ought to do, what our moral duty is according to them. They really are just three different ways of expressing the same thing. And I already gave two previous lectures about the first two formulas. The first one, the most well-known one, that tells us to act according to that maxim through which we can also want for it to become a universal law. That first formula basically just tells us to be in unity with ourselves, to not self-contradict, to not, on the one hand, want a certain law to be universally true, universally respected, but then make an exception for ourselves or for our group or whatever. No, we ought, that is the formula that is about the form of our actions, we ought to act in a manner that the form of our acting is lawful, that the form of our acting is in unity with itself, that the form of our acting is such that it could constitute a universal law, that everyone could act in this form. And the second formula was about the material, that is about the content of our actions. Since all actions have a purpose, an end, a goal, an aim, being moral means that amongst all those manifold purposes I could have, and from which I might use other things as means to reach my purpose, to reach my end, I should treat humanity, not the specific sensual human, but rather the humanity that we all share, that we all carry within us. I should treat that humanity as a purpose in itself. That is, I should have reverence for that humanity and for its autonomy, for its freedom, meaning I should not use a human being as merely a means to some end, while disregarding his freedom, but rather I should treat him as an end in itself, as a purpose in itself. But now, what is left is for me to address the third, the final formula of the categorical imperative, and it's the formula that is about treating our will as through itself, through its principle, giving a law to a kingdom of purposes. This is the least well-known formula, maybe also the, let's say, the most lofty one, or the one that could be hardest to understand. So let me start by addressing what Kant means by kingdom here, because it's about a kingdom of purposes. Now, first, let me say something about the translation. The word Kant uses is Reich. You may know that German word from the German Reich, the Nazi Reich. Reich, if you want to translate it more literally, Reich just means realm. So instead of saying kingdom of purposes, I could also say the realm of purposes. Reich could be any kind of realm. When we want to say kingdom, we say Königreich, so the realm of a king. But for example, you can also say Kaiserreich, which is the word for empire, because Kaiser means emperor, so Kaiserreich is the realm of an emperor. I've thought about how to translate it. As I said, realm of purposes would be the more literal translation. But you will often find this German term Kant uses. He says Reich der Zwecke. You will often find it translated as kingdom. Not just kingdom of purposes, but kingdom of ends, but that I will address a little later. And I ultimately decided to go with that translation too, because there is a religious, there is a Christian connotation here that Kant uses on purpose. I will also address that later on in the lecture. But in the Bible, there's the kingdom of God, right? The heavenly kingdom, the kingdom to come. And that in English is called not a realm, but a kingdom. While in German we say Reich Gottes. We don't necessarily say Königreich Gottes, we say Reich Gottes. So while I'm not entirely happy with translating Reich der Zwecke as kingdom of purposes, while I don't particularly like the word kingdom because it seems to very strongly imply a king, which is not what Kant wants to imply. Rather, he wants to leave that open. But still, I decided to go with it simply to keep that reference to the Bible, to biblical language, because Kant too has that reference on purpose. But anyway, so what does he mean by Reich, so by realm or by kingdom? He says it is a system or a collection of rational beings that are subject to the same law. You can maybe best understand that by thinking of a realm or a kingdom in the political sense, right? If several people are part of the same kingdom, let's say the kingdom of Great Britain, what does it mean to be part of the same kingdom? It means that they are subject to the same laws. And he who is not part of that kingdom is not under those laws. He's probably part of some other state, some other kingdom, and that kingdom's laws. But that is different laws. So that is what the kingdom in general is to Kant. And now, of course, this is not about political kingdoms. He makes a difference between two kingdoms, the kingdom of nature and the kingdom of purposes. Because, first of all, we are, of course, sensual beings. As sensual beings, we are part of the kingdom of nature, because, again, a kingdom means rational beings being under one and the same law, and we are indeed all under the natural law. We are, let's say, under the law of gravity, which is pulling us down. Or we are under the law that dictates that we must die one day. Or we all have sensual drives. We may have different drives, different both in what they want. Like, one person may like this food, and to another person it tastes disgusting. One person may find this person attractive, and another person might find that person unattractive. And also, of course, in degree. One person's drives may be stronger than another's. But the fact that we have sensual drives at all, which influence our choices, which can be driving springs for our faculty of choice, that is what we all have in common. Now, the thing with this realm of nature is that here we have heteronomy. So the law of nature, is not one we give ourselves freely, but one we simply are subjected to, whether we like it or not. Meaning that in the realm of nature there is no freedom. There is therefore no duty here, no moral duty. There is no shall. There's only a must. When you fall out of the window, you must fall down. It's not your choice to float up instead. Likewise, you must die one day. It's not up to you. So we are part of this realm of nature, and in this realm of nature we are determined by a law which, so to say, comes from the outside, which we don't give to ourselves. But the thing is that unlike, let's say, animals, we are not just sensual beings. So we are not just subjected to the natural law. We are also beings of reason. And as beings of reason, we can set ourselves a purpose. Sure, we have sensual drives that influence us, but unlike the animals, we don't act just on instinct without reflecting on whether we should act that way, but rather we can intellectually approve or disapprove of certain things and of certain actions. And we can judge whether something is good or not good. Good here could mean both. Good in the moral sense, that would be the immediate good to Kant, and the opposite of that would probably be evil. But also the mediate good, as Kant calls it. So good not in a moral sense, but in a technical, practical sense, that is the useful. Something that is not good in itself, but good for something. And the opposite of that would probably be not evil, but bad. Well, in both senses, we can judge whether something is good. So whether it's morally good or whether it's useful. Or the opposite, whether it's evil or bad. And thereby we can set purposes. I already addressed that it's not that easy to translate the German word Kant uses here, Zweck. I addressed that in the previous lecture on human dignity. And I also addressed that in the much earlier lecture on what is philosophy to Kant. So I don't have to go into detail on that here again. Rather, I invite you to check out those two lectures. But yeah, the word Zweck, you could, depending on, on the context, you could translate it as the aim, the purpose, the end, the point. And often I do find it translated as end. So you will probably hear the translation kingdom or realm of ends rather than kingdom or realm of purposes a lot. Which works well enough if you look only at Kant's moral philosophy, but as I will address later in this lecture, this kingdom of purposes translates or relates also to Kant's aesthetics and to Kant's thoughts on natural science, and therefore I think it's important to always translate this word Zweck with one and the same English word. And here I think that purpose is the best candidate. But no matter the translation, the point is that by setting a purpose, by judging that something is good in itself or good for something, we transform the things in the world. We transform the things of nature. If I need something for my purpose, like if I need a hammer to drive a nail into the wall, it becomes an item which has value for me. It has a price for me. If something is not needed for my purposes, like a stone lying by the road, then it's worthless for me. It has no value. But as soon as I need it, it becomes something that I value, something that I try to get my hands on, something that I try to keep and prevent from getting lost or getting destroyed, and something that I'm willing to give something for, something that I'm willing to make a sacrifice for. Now, just how big that sacrifice is that I'm willing to make, that of course very much depends on how important that purpose is. Like, is it my main purpose or is it more of a side purpose? And also it depends on how much that item is needed for that particular purpose, right? So if I want to drive a nail into the wall, I will need a hammer, and I'm probably willing to sacrifice a little of my money for that hammer, but probably not too much. If the hammer is too expensive, I'm not gonna buy it, both because there are other hammers which will serve my purpose just as well, but which might be cheaper, And also, well, because maybe it's not that important to get that nail into the wall. Maybe I will not go bankrupt over it. While another purpose might be more important to me. But still, no matter how little I'm willing to sacrifice, as soon as something has value for me, I will be willing to sacrifice something for it. That is what value means. And now the thing is that the moment I set a purpose, I transform the things in the world, not just for myself, because I don't exist in isolation. I don't live on an isolated island on my own, but rather I transform that thing for every rational being that could possibly interact with that thing. Because now others cannot just, so to say, innocently or mindlessly interact with that object, but rather their interactions with that object now have influence on my purpose, right? The moment I need an object, the moment it becomes a means for the actions I want to undertake, even if another person doesn't care about that object in particular, even if to him it has no value, he can no longer just destroy it or take it away without interfering with my purposes. And on the other hand, he can no longer leave it alone or bring it to me without helping me in my purposes, right? The stone by the wayside, as long as no one cares about the stone, I can just kick it and let it roll into the nearby lake. But if for whatever reason someone cares about that stone, someone needs that stone, I can now no longer kick it into the lake without interfering with that other person's purpose. And likewise, the moment I give value to an object, because I need it somehow, it gets value for others too. Even if they don't care about that object as such, even if they don't need the object as such, I need it. I am willing to sacrifice something for it, and that might make the object interesting for others too, even if just because they can sell it to me. So, again, we transform the world by giving purposes, by giving value. Without us, without rational beings, that would not be the case, right? If all human beings vanish, then suddenly items would also vanish. Not the objects that are items, but their being items, their being objects of use, objects of value, that would vanish. Like a gold coin as such, okay, might not vanish when humans vanish, but as a thing of value, it would stop existing. It would no longer be any more valuable than a random stone, because gold has no inherent value as such that is independent of us, but rather it has value because we give it value. So we transform the world, we set purposes, we give values, and we do it not just for ourselves, but by doing it for ourselves, we also do it for other rational beings. And that means that thereby we enter another kingdom, the kingdom of purposes. Because again, a kingdom means several rational beings being under a common law. And well, the law that says this object here is for that and that purpose, this object has a certain value, is a law I don't just set for myself, but that sort of automatically reaches other people too. And that is why, apart from being part of the kingdom of nature, we are also part of a kingdom of purposes. I am, of course, aware that we are living in an age of materialistic nihilism. So I assume that some people would respond to that there is no such thing as a kingdom of purposes. This is all just in our heads. It's a cold, uncaring, unfeeling universe, and such a thing as values, that's just an illusion, or purposes. There is no such thing as purpose or value. Whether it's economic value, like the value of a car, or the value of stocks or whatever, or cultural value, the value we ascribe to a picture, a piece of art, or that we ascribe to some building, some piece of architecture, or the value that is moral value, the value in itself, the value we ascribe to humanity as such. All of that is unknown to the universe. All of that is just something we make up. And to the materialist saying that, I respond, yes, that's quite correct. If you look from the perspective of nature. But that's just one perspective. If you look from the opposite perspective, the perspective of reason, the perspective of freedom, you could say the very opposite. I mean, there is no real discussion possible here between the two positions, because they are based on different principles. They have different roots. The materialist essentially says, I only believe whatever I can grab, or whatever I can look at, and anything that I can just think is not real for me. It's just in my head. While the idealist says, I believe only in what I can think, what I can understand, what I can grasp with my intellect, and anything like matter, which I can't understand, that is just in my senses. So that I just see, that I just touch, is not real for me. Doesn't matter to me. Between those two positions, they just assume different perspectives. There is no real immediate conciliation. I would just like if the materialists were intellectually honest, and that would mean not claiming to be the rational ones. But that's what they do nowadays. They say, believing in anything that isn't physical, that isn't matter, that is irrational. Believing in something that you can only think but not see or touch, that's irrational. That's basically superstition. We materialists, we are the rational ones. I mean, no, you're obviously not. You are a rationalist. You don't believe that reason is a thing. You don't believe that that which can be thought, that which can be proven through thinking, has any reality or any merit to it. You distrust reason. You trust only your senses. fine, that can be your position, you are allowed to think so, but then you should be intellectually honest and not assume the name of rationalists and not accuse those with the opposite position of being irrational, when it's quite the other way around. But then again, intellectual honesty is also something that you cannot look at or touch. So it makes sense that to those people, intellectual honesty is also not real. But anyways, that materialistic position can of course be addressed both in a theoretical and in a practical manner. In a theoretical manner, I can respond with Kant's transcendental idealism. And I discussed that in previous lectures on Kant's theoretical philosophy. In particular, I point out the lecture on the appearance and the thing in itself, and the lecture on transcendental idealism. And basically what Kant shows is that this nature, this universe, which is cold and unfeeling and knows of no purposes and of no values, which is the only reality for the materialist, that it is just the appearance. It is what we are conscious of, what appears in our consciousness, but it is not the thing in itself. And so when the materialist says values, purposes, that's just in your head, that's not real, I could respond, if I don't want to be philosophically precise in my language, I could respond with, well, matter and this whole material universe is just in your head. I mean, how else would you know about it if it wasn't in your head, if you weren't conscious of it? Clearly, you cannot even talk about something that is outside your consciousness, because, well, as soon as you talk about it, as soon as you think about it, it's once again in your consciousness. That would be the theoretical response. But even if we put transcendental idealism aside, even if we just look from a practical standpoint, then we have to note that those people who say that there is no such thing as value or purpose, they can say so, but they don't believe it. They don't act like it. And that I find quite funny, because there's always this accusation that the philosopher is sitting in the ivory tower, and what he says, all his lofty theories he comes up with, and having his head in the clouds, that has nothing to do with real life. But again and again, you can find that it's actually the opposite. The philosopher is quite connected to real life, and it's his unphilosophical opponent who sits in the ivory tower making claims that you can make as long as you are just talking, but then when he goes back to his daily life, not living according to those claims, because I am pretty sure that to those people, values are real. The good is real. Even if they are not moral people, and therefore there is no absolute value to them, nothing that has dignity, nothing that is a value in itself. And even if there is no immediate, no moral good to them, there's at least the immediate good, there's at least the useful. I'm pretty sure that they are willing to sacrifice something for some things. They are willing to pay money for some things. They probably want to earn money. They probably want to pay their rent. They probably want to have a roof over their head. and basically say that this has more value to them than living on the street. So really, when they deny that there are values in the world, they are just contradicting themselves. There are. Not in nature. Again, I fully admit that. Without rational beings, there would be no such things. The value, the purpose is not something you can touch. It's not a tangible object. It is, so to say, in our head. But that doesn't make it any less real. It's real in a practical sense. It is real for our actions. And that is what matters here. The realm, the kingdom of purposes is a practical kingdom. The kingdom of purposes now is a kingdom of freedom. That is the big difference to the kingdom of nature. As I said, in the kingdom of nature, there's heteronomy. There's a law to which we are simply subjected, which we didn't give ourselves. But in the kingdom of purposes, there's autonomy. There is not a law imposed on us on the outside, but rather there is the law we give ourselves. And here we get to the third formula of the categorical imperative, which tells us to treat the will of every rational being as a universally law-giving will in the kingdom of purposes. I remind you, I said that in the first lecture on the categorical imperative, that the categorical imperative, with its three formulas, relates to the three categories of quantity in Kant's philosophy, which are unity and plurality and totality. So the first formula, the formal one, was about the unity in the form of our acting, right? Acting according to a principle, according to a maxim, which could be fit to be a universal law. The second one was about the plurality of purposes, of aims in action, and out of those many purposes, making humanity the one purpose above all others, the one that is a purpose in itself. Well, when it comes to the categories, I explained that in the lecture on the table of categories as key to Kant's philosophy, and I strongly encourage you to check out that lecture. It's one of the most important ones because, as the title says, the table of categories is the key to Kant's whole system, and without it you don't get Kant's system. As I explained in that lecture, within Kant's table of categories, there are 4 titles, each of 3 categories, and it's always the first 2 categories that, if combined, lead to the third. So when it comes to quantity, unity combined with plurality is totality, because the totality on the one hand is one, it's a unity, it's oneness. You cannot have many totals, many alls. All means there's just one of it. But at the same time, it is clearly a plurality. It is not a simple unity, but rather it contains many. As the name says, it even contains all things. So the all, the total, is the unity of the plurality. Or if you want to express it the other way around, it is a plurality which has unity. So likewise, when it comes to the three formulas, since they relate to these three categories, and the third formula relates to that of totality, um, it stands to reason that they too depend on one another, that the third formula um, is the result of combining the first two. Because once again, the first formula is just about the form of our actions. It just tells us that our actions should have generality or universality, even. They should be able to constitute a universal law, but it doesn't say what the content of our action, what the purpose of our acting should be. And that could lead to people thinking that basically any sort of action could be morally allowed or morally good, um, if you just apply the right sophistry to pretend that this action could constitute a universal law. And I have often seen and read such sophistry when it comes to Kant. Often people just focus on the first formulation of the categorical imperative and then twist things around to make evil actions appear, to make evil actions seem to conform to universal lawfulness. On the other hand, the second formula, which is about the purpose, about humanity as a purpose in itself, could also lead to confusion, maybe. Because for one, it seems to only focus on this or that specific human being in whom you have to have reverence for his humanity. But you should not just look at the individual case, right? When it comes to morality. That's what we often do. That's what Nietzsche already criticized, that morality is often so focused on just one specific individual interaction, like, am I helping this person? Am I hurting this person? And people fail to see the broader, the more holistic picture, the whole system of interactions between peoples. But the other issue with the second formula, telling us to treat humanity as a purpose in itself, is that here we have a content, but not a form. So again, someone could twist that around and could think that even actions that cannot have, because of their form, cannot become universal, could not be done by everyone, the world could not work that way. Even such actions might still be actions that express reverence for humanity, that don't take humanity as a mere means. Someone could think that. Well, and so we get the third formula of the categorical imperative, which combines form and content, which tells us that we should have reverence for humanity, for the will of the human being. The human being should be the purpose in itself, in the realm of purposes, meaning humanity, the will of each human, should be treated as giving a universal law in this realm of purposes. So now the content, treating humanity as a purpose, is about the form, about acting in a manner that is fit to be lawful, fit to give a universal law. And on the other hand, the form, acting in a universal manner, is now about the content, about acting in such a way that you have reverence for the autonomy of humanity. All of that might be quite abstract, so let's get a bit more specific. What does Kant mean by all of that? Well, the whole point is that since we are beings that can set purposes, but we are not alone, we are in a realm, in a kingdom of purposes together with other human beings, um, our purposes can clash, right? So let's take a tree. Let's say my purpose is I want to eat the fruit from that tree. And I want to eat it not just once, I want to keep that tree around for years to always have something to eat. I want to care for that tree, to cultivate it, to water it, and so on. And if I were alone on a lone island, if, well, I were the only one to set purposes, that would be perfectly fine, no problem there. But now I share the world with other human beings who might not share my purposes. Maybe someone else comes along who also sets his eyes on that tree, but who wants to cut it down and use the wood to burn, to make a fire. Again, that would be fine if he were on a lone island. He could do with the trees whatever he wanted. But here it becomes clear that our purposes defeat each other. The tree cannot be cut down and be burned if it is to keep giving fruits for the next years. And it cannot do that if it is cut down and burned. So now there's a clash of purposes. And it is clear how that can be resolved. It can be resolved by a law binding both people and determining what should happen, whose purposes have precedent when it comes to this tree. And a law could be a law of property. The people could make some sort of contract and agree that this piece of land is mine, so all the trees on it are mine, and only what I want to happen to them happens. So if I want to keep them and keep eating from them, then no one is allowed to cut them down because that would defeat my purposes. But at the same time, I promise the other guy that this piece of land over there is his piece of land, and all the trees on it are his trees, and he can do with them whatever he wants. So if he wants to cut them down and burn them, I will not prevent that. I will not get in between and try to save the trees. So this way, through this agreement, through each of us getting his own property, and property means an object that is subjected only to my purposes and that no one else is allowed to use for his purposes without my permission, right? That's the meaning of property. Well, if there's such a law, if everyone gets his property and the other has his property and all is set and we act according to that law, then there is no clash of purposes anymore. And this, to Kant, is what morality is about. He defines morality at one point as the set of rules according to which alone rational beings can be part of a system of purposes. And a system, to Kant, always means an organic whole. I addressed that in previous lectures, like the one on what is science, that to Kant there are aggregates, which are just like piles of sand, where each grain is sort of independent of the others and can be taken away or added. But a system is organic. A system he compares not to a pile of sand, but to an organic body, where every organ has its place in the whole and cannot just be taken away, or you cannot just add one. So that is what morality is about. Morality is about those rules that are necessary, that need to be followed if all rational beings are to be part of one system, of one realm of purposes, where their individual purposes never clash. If you think about it, all evil always means that there's a clash of purposes, that the evil person just goes after his goals and completely disregards the freedom, the autonomy of other human beings, and completely disregards what their goals may be. Whether someone steals or rapes or murders, basically he's always committing an action that destroys the system, the kingdom of purposes, that makes it impossible for rational beings to, so to say, live in a harmony of purposes. So acting morally then, once again, would mean that you have to act in such a manner that a harmonious kingdom of purposes is possible. And that can only mean one thing, if you think about it. It means that potentially you can do with items whatever you want, because they don't have their own purposes. So whether you keep the tree and eat from its fruits, or whether you cut the tree down and burn it, either way, you are not defeating the tree's purposes, because the tree has no purpose. But what you need to do to be moral is treating rational beings, treating beings that have a will. So beings that have autonomy, beings that are capable of setting a purpose, treating them as a purpose as such, treating them not as mere means, not disregarding the purposes they set, but rather sort of respecting their purposes. So that is what morality is about, really. Having reverence for purposiveness as such, or for the ability, that is autonomy, freedom, to set a purpose. And therefore, once again, according to the third formula, morality is about treating the will of every rational being, that is your own and also others, as universal law giving. So each will should only want things that could be a universal law, that could be wanted by everyone. And then, if he does that, but only then, should that will also be respected. So you are good if what you want is something that everyone could subscribe to. So, for example, the physician who tries to save a person's life, clearly that is not just his particular will. I mean, it could also happen to be someone's particular will, like if the person in mortal danger is your loved one, then you want to keep them alive for personal reasons. But this could also be a universal will, because the person in mortal danger clearly, presumably, wants to keep living. And also, everyone else could agree that they would want the same thing in that situation. They would also want their lives saved. On the other hand, if you, once again, pick the fruits from that tree, and as long as the tree doesn't belong to somebody else and you're not stealing from it, then this is not necessarily what everyone wants. Not everyone maybe wants those fruits to be picked. But there's no one who necessarily wants it not to happen. Therefore, while it's not a morally good action, it's also not evil. It's an action you can do, you are allowed to do. But if you commit fraud, if you trick someone, then that is just your particular will tricking that person. But it is clearly not a universal will. It is not the will of humanity as such, because that person himself clearly doesn't want to be tricked. I mean, that is simply an analytic judgment, right? It's in the very concept of a fraud, of being tricked. You are making someone act against his will. You are pretending that through his action he will achieve something, and he's only doing that action to achieve that particular thing, but in fact he doesn't achieve it, he gets something else. Like, for example, you make him give you his money thinking that he will get something in return, and in truth you take his money and run away with it, and he doesn't get anything in return. If he had known that right away, he wouldn't have given you that money, because his purpose was getting whatever you promised, not gifting you money. So in this case, it's clear that the action comes from your particular will, you wanting that money, but it is not something that every rational being could have wanted. The one who got tricked clearly didn't want it. So that is what morality is about. Acting in such a manner, only having such a will that could, not that is, but that could be the will of everyone. Once again, it might be helpful to take the abstract formula of the categorical imperative and look at it through the lens of the type of the moral law. But that is, I addressed in the first lecture on the categorical imperative, the one on the moral law, so 2 lectures ago. I said that Kant has this type of the moral law, which is not itself a formula. It's not like a force formula of the categorical imperative. Rather, it helps us to apply this supersensual, intelligible law by imagining it, this law of reason, through our intellect as a law of nature. So in other words, we should imagine that our will gives laws to nature, that which we want becomes a universal natural law, and we should ask if that could work. And that is what we should do here when it comes to the third formula of the categorical imperative too. We should look at the realm of purposes as if it was the realm of nature. So, as if it wasn't a realm of freedom, where everyone could do whatever he chooses to do, but rather as if there was heteronomy, so as if people were compelled to act in a certain way. And now I should consider, what if I, with my will, was the one giving the law that compels everyone? Would that work? And clearly, if I give my selfish, egoistical principles, they wouldn't work as general laws. If I follow my selfish goals and another person follows his selfish goals, they will inevitably crush. They will clash and they will defeat one another. There is no way around this. Only if I abstract from my particularity for me being this specific sensual individual only if I have a will that could be agreed with and affirmed by everyone. Only then am I moral. That is what morality is about. Only wanting what everyone could agree with me wanting. There needs to be a universal unity of purposes. So, what myself chooses should happen with an item. For example, choosing that this tree should be cut down should be something that everyone could choose, that everyone could be willing to agree with. And likewise, the others should choose only to do what I could agree with. Here I want to make an important note, not so much about morality as such, but about Kant's whole system. Because I just said that according to the type of the moral law, we should look at the kingdom of purposes as if it were the kingdom of nature. Well, Kant says there's also an instance when we look at the kingdom of nature as if it was a kingdom of purposes, and that is in teleology. Telos is the Greek word for purpose, or for the word Zweck that Kant uses in German. So teleology is basically the doctrine of the purposes in nature, that looks at nature as having purposes. So it looks at nature not as being arbitrary and contingent, just happening to be this way, but it could also be another way. But rather it looks at nature as if things were meant to be that way. So when I say, for example, the eye is there so that we and other animals can see, or some animals have wings so that they can fly. Not we have eyes and it just so happens that we can see with them, or these animals have wings and it so happens that through those wings they are able to fly, but they have the eyes to see, they have the wings to fly, as if that was their purpose, as if someone had made them specifically as a means for that purpose. And in his last of his three critiques, and the critique of the power of judgment, because purposiveness is a concept a priori of our power of judgment, Kant says. I discussed that in the lecture on what is the power of judgment. It is the reflective power of judgment, which judges if something has a purpose and what the purpose might be. So in the critique of the power of judgment, Kant asks, can we determine whether there is a purpose in nature? So can we do teleology? And I will get into that in a much later lecture, probably next year, when I get to Kant's thoughts on natural science. But in short, he says that we cannot say that there really is a purpose in nature, objectively. Therefore, we can also not use that as proof, for example, that there must be a God, right? Saying, oh, something like the eye could not have developed randomly through evolution. It clearly has a purpose. It was made for seeing, so there must be someone who made that. That would be a bad argument, Kant says. But he says that teleology can serve as a regulative principle for the natural scientist, particularly for the biologist. That is, we are allowed to look at nature as if things were not contingent but had a purpose, because that can help us discover certain things, right? If the biologist discovers a new species of animal that, let's say, has a particular pattern, color pattern on his back, if he doesn't say, oh, it's just randomly, it just happens to have these colors, but rather if he looks at the animal as if someone had designed it like this on purpose, and asks, okay, what is the purpose of that particular color pattern, then that can help him find that maybe it helps for camouflage, or maybe it helps attracting sexual partners for that animal or whatever. But anyways, so Kant says in teleology, we look at the realm, at the kingdom of nature, as if it was the kingdom of purposes. Just like in morality, we should treat the kingdom of purposes as if it was the kingdom of nature. And thirdly, what connects both of them is in aesthetics, is Kant's teaching on the beautiful, which he also discusses in the critique of the power of judgment, and which I discussed in the lectures on what is beauty and on the connection between beauty, freedom, and morality. Because when it comes to beauty, Kant says we find that beautiful whose form is purposive. So when we find something in nature, like a flower or butterfly or whatever, when we find it beautiful, what we are saying is that its form is purposive. Its form doesn't seem random, doesn't seem chaotic, doesn't seem like it just so happens to be like that. Like we don't find random chaos particularly beautiful, like just a bunch of garbage spilled on the ground. That's not beautiful. Rather, we find a certain order, a certain harmony beautiful. And the difference, of course, is that teleology asks if there's an objective purpose in nature, right? If the eye is for seeing, if the wing is for flying, independently of us, of the observer. The aesthetical judgment that something is beautiful says it is purposive, but not because it has a particular objective purpose. The flower is not beautiful because it has the purpose of attracting insects to pollinate it through its colors or through its smell. That would be an objective purpose, one towards the insects, not towards me, the observer. But rather, I find the flower beautiful simply because I, observing it, contemplating it, looking at it, find its form purposive. The form, so to say, fits with my faculty of cognition. And that is precisely why the beautiful is sort of the bridge from the realm of nature to the realm, to the kingdom of purposes. And that's also why Kant says that the beautiful can be a symbol of the morally good. Because if you imagine beautiful nature, like a beautiful garden with the flowers and the butterflies and so on, there is a harmony with it. All the various parts, they don't clash, they don't get in conflict with one another, but rather they form a harmonious whole, where each part has its specific place and doesn't get in the way of the other parts because they have their place. And so this harmony that you would find in, let's say, a beautiful garden is sort of a reflection or sort of a sensualization of the supersensual harmony that you would have if all people were morally good. Because then too, no one would get in each other's way. Their purposes would not clash with one another, but would form a harmonious whole. This should also make more clear why this third formula is related to the category of totality. It is about the totality of the kingdom of purposes, of all rational beings forming one harmonious order with each other, one system, one organic whole. And this should also hopefully make even more clear, I talked about that in the lecture on what is freedom, why to Kant morality is about freedom. We nowadays have this primitive concept of morality as being some sort of straitjacket, something that restricts us, some as I already said, some rules of political correctness and conduct that someone imposes on us from outside. And that's why people often reject morality, thinking that someone imposes those arbitrary moral commandments on them and thereby takes away their freedom. But no, it's quite the opposite. The moral law is one that freedom gives to itself, and rather than taking our freedom, it gives us freedom. It liberates us from being slaves to our animal drives, and it lifts us into a realm of freedom. It is what makes freedom possible in the first place, what makes it possible for human beings to set purposes and not have those purposes defeated immediately again. Which is also what gives the specific kind of pleasure that only the moral person knows. I addressed in the earlier lecture on what is pleasure and pain to Kant, I addressed that to Kant, pleasure is always a feeling of my vitality, my life force being improved, being strengthened. And this is something that happens to the highest degree when we are moral, Kant would say. Because the highest form of life is freedom, is the free life. And through morality, we get liberated, our freedom gets improved. Through creating this harmony between all humans and their purposes, through removing the obstacles, the conflicts between them, we are improving, we are strengthening life and thereby receiving a specific kind of moral pleasure that is completely unknown to the evil person. Now it happens that a human being is a citizen of both worlds. You often hear that quoted. I want to stress that this is actually not a quote by Kant. He never says it in those exact words. I would know, I read everything Kant said, all 29 volumes, and there's never that direct quote, so in that sense it's a misquote if we go by the letter, but by the spirit of what it says, it truly is a correct quote. This is basically what Kant is expressing. The human being is a citizen of two worlds, of the kingdom of nature and of the kingdom of purposes. So maybe you could also say that in the kingdom of nature he is not a citizen, he is just a subject. I will get in some weeks and some months to Kant's political philosophy, and basically a subject is he who is subjected to laws, but a citizen is he who, whether directly or indirectly being represented by the lawgiver, who himself takes part in the lawgiving. So you could also say that in the realm of nature, we are just subjects, but in the kingdom of purposes, we are citizens. We ourselves are the lawgivers there. And the fact that we are part of these two different kingdoms is precisely the reason that there is such a thing for us as moral duty. Because if we were only part of the kingdom of purposes, then we wouldn't have a duty. We simply would be moral. Every shall would be useless because we would already want what we shall do, what we ought to do. This is the case for God. I addressed that further in the lecture on freedom. It's a primitive concept of freedom to Kant, thinking that freedom means being able to choose between good and evil. No, freedom is being able to give ourselves a law, being able to judge about good and evil, and follow our own judgment, follow our insight, doing that what we recognized as good. And so God, since no sensual drives pull him in another direction, is free, but it means he can only act in one manner, precisely because he is free. He can only act in that manner which he sets for himself, and nothing else can make him ever contradict himself, ever estrange from himself. But for us, this is not the case. We, as citizens of both worlds, we can act rationally and thereby morally, but we don't necessarily have to, and that is exactly why it becomes a duty for us. This is also the source of the feeling of reverence. That is very important for Kant, so I will address it further in another lecture, because to him, our choice always needs a driving spring that drives our choices. And if we act morally, those driving springs are not our natural drives, but it is that feeling of reverence, the moral feeling. And this moral feeling, again, is something we have as citizens of both worlds. It's that feeling of the necessity of subjecting our particular will as sensual beings, subjecting ourselves as the homo phenomenon, the appearing human, to the homo noumenon, to humanity as such, to the will of the whole, and having reverence for that will of the whole, which, simply because it is only one, must be in unity with itself and cannot contradict itself. But again, I will address that moral feeling further in another lecture. For now, I just want to stress this, that we are parts of both worlds. That's why we can, of course, be evil, but we have the moral duty to be good and to realize the realm of purposes. Because this realm or kingdom of purposes, of course, it's just an ideal. In that sense, the materialists are right. It's not real. Clearly, this harmony of purposes where nobody clashes, clearly that is not real. It is an ideal. But the role of an ideal, I talked about that in its own lecture on the result of the critique of reason, and also in the lecture on what is reason, where I said that to Kant, the role of our ideas is not to be concepts of what is, that help us understand what is, understand the rules that govern the things that are. No, the role of ideas is to tell us what we should strive for. And so the ideal of this realm of purposes is something that, yes, it's not real, it's in our head, but we ought to make it real. We ought to do our part to realize this kingdom of purposes. Because while it is not real currently, no one can deny that it could be real potentially. Maybe it never will be. Probably it never will be. We can get ever closer to it, but we will probably never reach it, because to fully realize this kingdom of purposes, this harmony, every single person would have to take part of it. As if there's just one person who goes with his particular selfish will, who steps out of the general harmony and acts against the universal purpose, then we have not realized the kingdom of purposes yet. So sure, it will probably never be fully realized, but there is nothing that makes it necessary that this couldn't be realized. Like, there's nothing in the laws of nature that contradicts it. If it never gets realized, it is just due to human freedom, to humans choosing not to realize it, and to humans just being evil and unworthy. So it is our own fault then. We have to admit that nothing but our own fault prevents this from becoming real. And since we can agree that this kingdom of purposes should be real, that it would be a good thing, like even the evil person, if he thinks about it neutrally, has to agree that it would be a good thing if the world was like that. Even he would have to agree that he would probably prefer living in such a world of harmony. He will probably justify the fact that he is not doing his part to realize it. He will probably say, that's unrealistic. It will never be realized anyways. Other people would still act selfishly even if I stop being selfish. So why should I sacrifice for nothing? He may say all of that, but what he can't say rationally is that he wouldn't want this at all, that this would be a bad thing. So, since our reason understands that this is a good thing, that this is something that should be this kingdom of purposes, and since at the same time we have to admit that it could be, that it is only on us, that means we have the duty to make it happen, to realize it. And we should act in such a manner that if everyone acted like we do, the kingdom of purposes would be realized. We need to act in such a manner that we are able to say, it's not my fault. I did my part. However bad the world is, it is not because of me. If everyone was like me, if everyone acted like me, if everyone had my goodwill, then this world would be paradise. That's what every moral person must be able to say. It is, whatever evil is happening in the world is not even in the slightest possible way my fault. I do what I can. And in that sense, the kingdom of purposes is not just a kingdom of freedom, it is also the kingdom of grace that the theologians talk about. As I said at the start, hence why I chose also the translation of kingdom and not the more closer translation of realm, because this is the kingdom of God. This is the heavenly kingdom. To Kant, morality is about achieving the highest good. This too I will address further in its own lecture, but basically the highest good to him would mean both the worthiness of being happy, that is virtue, being good, right? Good people would deserve being happy, and the actual happiness. One of the two alone doesn't constitute the highest good. Like if everyone was a good person but still suffered, that would not be good. Our reason would reject such a world. But if people gained happiness that don't deserve it, that are evil, that would also not be good. No, the highest good would be a world where the worthiness of being happy and the actual happiness are in equal proportion. And that would be this fully realized kingdom of purposes. If everyone was good, then clearly everyone would deserve happiness. And also, if everyone was good, then clearly everyone would have happiness. If the purposes didn't clash, no one's purposes were disturbed, no one had bad, selfish purposes that disturbed the justified purposes of others, then there would be universal happiness. And Kant says, he likes to say in his lectures that if people wanted and if people were good, then they could erect a paradise on earth, even on Novaya Zemlya. So that island north of Muscovy, deep in the polar sea, even there where it's so cold, even there where the conditions are not perfect for human habitation, we could have the paradise on earth if we just decided to be good, Kant stresses. And in that sense, heaven is not some other dimension that you get teleported to when you die, but rather heaven is an ideal of our own reason, an ideal we carry within ourselves, and that we ought to realize. Heaven is something that isn't just there, and we don't just have to wait till we die and hopefully get there, but rather heaven is a task for us, a mission. Heaven is something we ought to create here on this earth, and everyone should do his part to create it. And in this, like in many other things, Kant's morality is very much in accordance with Christian teaching, with what Jesus says in the Bible. Because there Jesus says that the kingdom of God cometh not with observation, neither shall they say, Lo here or lo there, for behold, the kingdom of God is within you. And even after death, heaven to Kant is not some place, some beautiful garden with attractive virgins treating you or whatever, where we go to. Those images, if we take them by the letter, would just be silly superstitions. No, he describes heaven as being in community with all the good, all the holy souls. And so since they are good, they would realize in their community this kingdom of purposes, while hell would just be being in community with all the evil souls. So there would be constant strife and constant fighting within each other. This too I will address in a future lecture when I get to what Kant says about life after death. And in this kingdom of purposes, whether in this central world or in the next, God is the unifying bond between the individual wills that allows them to have an effect on one another. Maybe this makes more clear, more understandable, something I said in two earlier lectures, in the lecture on sensuality and space and time as forms of viewing, and in the lecture on rational psychology and whether we have an immortal soul. In both those lectures, I addressed it to Kant. Space is the phenomenon of God's omnipresence. Right? So Kant makes this distinction between the phenomenal, the sensual world, the world as it appears to us, and the thing in itself, which we cannot know, which we can have no cognition of, that is the noumenal world, the intelligible world, that doesn't appear to us, that we can think but not view. And again, space he describes as the phenomenon of God's omnipresence. And maybe this now becomes a little more understandable, because space is what connects things in the sensual world, right? The only reason why different things can affect one another, for example, why one object can push another object, is because they inhabit the same space. And likewise, in the intelligible realm, the only reason why different wills can affect each other is because God is present in them all. And Kant stresses that this is not a spatial omnipresence, like God being extended somehow and a part of God being here, a part of God being there. It's more like a virtual omnipresence. Like the way one and the same computer program can be installed on different computers. And because God is virtually omnipresent in all souls, in all wills, they can form a kingdom together, a kingdom of purposes, where they have an effect on one another. So this is just something that can be read in some notes of Kant's. It is not something he goes into further detail about. This is where he gets closest to some sort of Spinozism, right? Spinoza, the Jewish philosopher who was a pantheist, who famously said Deus sive natura, so God or nature, it was one and the same to him. And of course, Spinoza was what Kant would describe as a transcendental realist. So he took nature as being the thing in itself. If Kant is a sort of Spinozist, then his Spinozism is a transcendental one, an idealistic one. So he's not saying that God is the world, the essential nature, because the world, so to say, is not at all. It is just an appearance. But the thing in itself, here maybe God, maybe everything, or at least maybe the fundament of everything. Again, it's not really clear because Kant doesn't go into this. If you read him, especially just his published text, it often seems like there are many things in themselves, and maybe God is one of them. But that doesn't make too much sense if you think about it. God cannot be one amongst many things if God is without limit, because then he would have to end somewhere and another thing would have to begin. And there are some notes or some remarks in lectures that make it seem like maybe Kant sees the thing in itself more as only one thing in itself, that only in appearance becomes a multitude, that only appears as many sensual things, but really it's just that one God. It was only Fichte who built on Kant and who was more consistent and saw Kant to the end in many aspects, who declared more openly that he was building a sort of Spinozism, but a Spinozism of freedom, Spinozism of transcendental idealism. And it was Fichte who more openly said that God is the moral world order. Not the orderer who orders the moral world order, but rather Fichte said such a thing is not needed. It's just unnecessary to assume that outside the moral world order there is some person who orders it. No, the moral world order himself is God, which Fichte said, but which could be concluded even from Kant. So this is what started the atheism controversy at the end of the 1790s that cost Fichte his professorship in Jena because he was accused of being an atheist. Kant, since he wasn't quite open or didn't think things quite to the end as openly, Kant didn't have such problems. I'm now approaching the end, but I want to give an overview over Kant's system as a whole here and the place of this idea of the kingdom of purposes in Kant's system. To Kant, as I already said, there are these two worlds: the sensual world that appears to us, nature, that natural science deals with, and then there's the supersensual, intelligible, noumenal world. And that is the world metaphysics deals with. Metaphysics, I made my own lecture about what is metaphysics to Kant. Metaphysics as the science of the supersensual, as the science that mainly asks what are and are God, freedom, and immortality of the soul. And Kant's critical project, in a way, asks what can we know and how, if, about this supersensual world. And when it comes to the theoretical, which he deals with in his critique of pure reason, Kant finds humans caught up between two cliffs, as he says. Because on the one hand, there is empiricism, which says that we can only know the empirical, so we can only know what is within the realm of our experience, and we cannot know what is beyond that, or rather, there is nothing beyond that. There is only nature, and there is no such thing as God, free will, or an immortal soul. And on the other side, there is the dogmatic philosophy of his age, the school philosophy, like the Leibniz-Wolffian philosophy that was waning in Germany in the 18th century, which says that we can know through our reason, we can rise beyond experience, and we can know something about the supersensual realm. And here, to Kant, the answer, the result of his critique is that no, we cannot know anything about the supersensual realm. That also means, however, that we cannot know that there's nothing. We cannot, just like we cannot prove God or freedom or immortality of the soul, we cannot disprove them. That goes for theory, that goes for speculation, that goes for mere knowledge. And Kant, with this answer, tries to get us through between those two cliffs. However, he would say that the latter cliff, that of dogmatic philosophy, is the more dangerous one. Because while the empiricist goes too far when he says not only can we not know anything about the supersensual, we actually can know that there is nothing, he is not really destroying or breaking anything, as long as we only consider theory. Because from his position, you can still do natural science. You can still have cognition of this sensual world around you. But on the other hand, this dogmatic philosophy with its metaphysics, Kant says, it gets into what in German he calls Schwärmerei. So flying into illusionary realms beyond the bounds of reason, sort of like mysticism. Um, those rationalist philosophers of his day might not consider themselves what was called Schwärmer. They might not be mystics that have visions. They might say, no, no, we use logical reasoning to go beyond experience. But still, they go beyond experience, Kant says. They are really no better than the visionaries. And the danger here is not only that they come to wrong conclusions, but rather that natural science is destroyed in the process. If you can make up and seemingly prove all sorts of higher knowledge, maybe including spirits and miracles and whatever, then you can also believe that the laws of nature are not universally true, or you can explain certain phenomena in nature with supernatural explanations or whatever. But then when we get to the practical, to acting, to morality, it is the opposite. Here Kant says we can know the supersensual realm. Theoretically, we can only know it in a negative way. We can only say what it isn't. It is supersensual, meaning it is not sensual. But what it is positively, we cannot say. Practically, we can say something about the intelligible world. We can say it is a kingdom of purposes. It is a realm of free, autonomous beings acting, beings that should act morally. But we can only know the intelligible world in a practical sense. So, insofar as it relates to our moral actions here in this sensible world. Beyond that, we still can have no knowledge of the supersensual world. So, for example, we still cannot prove that we have an immortal soul. I can say, now I am part of an invisible supersensual kingdom of purposes. I cannot deduce from that past the end of my physical existence, I will remain a part of this realm of purposes. My soul will remain in it even when my body dies. That's something I cannot prove. So still, I can only know the supersensual realm in a practical sense, insofar as I have to know it for my praxis, for my action, but not beyond that. And here in the practical too, there are once again these two cliffs, Kant would say. There is, on the one hand, once again, empiricism, which would say that there is no kingdom of purposes and that there is no autonomy, no moral law we give to ourselves, but rather there's only our sensual drives. And so all our actions are determined by sensual drives. Because, as I addressed in the lecture on the imperatives, according to Kant, there are only two possible principles of action, right? Because we are citizens of two worlds. We either have eleutheronomy, the free law-giving, moral action, or we have eudaimonism, the principle of happiness, trying to do whatever feels good for us, whatever brings us lasting pleasure. So the empiricist would be the eudaimonist that says, I just selfishly go after my own happiness. There is no real morality. And then the opposite cliff And the practical would be mysticism. That would be people claiming to have visions of the supersensual realm, of the heavenly kingdom, claiming to be in community with the spirits, to talk to the angels, to see, to really feel God as the unifying bond between all rational beings. And this too Kant considers wrong. But here in the practical, it is the other way around. It is now the empiricism which is the more dangerous cliff, right? In the theoretical, empiricism went too far in claiming there is no supersensual realm, but at least it's still allowed for doing natural science, while the dogmatic metaphysics pose the danger of disbelieving in the laws of nature and thereby destroying our ability to do natural science. Now it's the other way around. Now it's the empiricism that is most dangerous, because it entirely destroys morality. It says we have no free will, we can only act selfishly, there is only the happiness principle, and that's all. While the mysticism Kant considers to be wrong. He would say we cannot view the supersensual realm as long as we are in this sensual life. But it doesn't necessarily destroy morality. It does pose this danger if the mystic thinks that his feeling of universal connectedness with all beings and his feeling of being in God and melting into God, that this proves that he is already holy, he is already enlightened, and now he doesn't have to act anymore. This would be very wrong, Kant would say. He still is in this sensual world for a reason. God put him here for a reason and not on a cloud in heaven. So he still has the duty to actually act morally, not just feel connected with everything. So there is this danger that this cliff too might, might harm morality, which is precisely why Kant tries to guide humans between both cliffs. But still, it is less dangerous. It doesn't necessarily utterly destroy morality. I will also add that Kant's relationship to that mysticism is a little more nuanced than it seems to be, or than most people think. Particularly, he was influenced by Emanuel Swedenborg, a Swedish philosopher of the 18th century, who allegedly could talk to the dead and had visions of heaven and could see what was happening in other places. And Kant, in his pre-critical time, for a time was interested in Swedenborg, got his books, read them, but was very disappointed. And he wrote a book, Dreams of a Spirit Seer, in the middle of the 1760s, which is like his last major pre-critical work. And in that book, he gets unusually polemical. Usually, Kant is quite friendly and quite reserved in his tone, but here he got so polemical that Moses Mendelssohn, the Jewish thinker who exchanged letters with Kant, and they both very much respected each other. But in this instance, he wrote to him that Kant had gone a little far and that he was right in the matter, but his tone had been too harsh. This work, this Dreams of a Spirit Seer, where Kant deals with Swedenborg, is important because on the face of it, it seems to be about Swedenborg and about mysticism and how that is nonsense. Um, but actually, if you read more closely, it is also Kant dealing for one last time with the waning Leibniz-Wolffian school philosophy, with the waning dogmatic metaphysics, because he basically says that, yeah, sure, Swedenborg is probably nuts, and his visions, they can't be proven. But the usual metaphysicians who may look down on someone like Swedenborg, call him a Schwärmer in German, they are really no better. They are not claiming to have visions, they are claiming to use logical reasoning, but they are still doing the same thing, um, going beyond the bounds of our experience into realms which we simply cannot access. So in a way, this book is not just about Swedenborg, but about the metaphysics of the time. And after that, I discussed that in the lecture on Kant's life. After that, very soon, Kant fell silent for a decade, for the 1770s, working on his critique of pure reason, on his critique of the metaphysics of his day, and then coming out with it in 1781 and starting the critical period of his thought. But anyways, if you read only Kant's published works, like this text, this book, Dreams of a Spirit Seer, you get a somewhat one-sided impression of his relationship to Swedenborg. If you also go through his notes and his lectures, you will find that he was actually quite influenced by him, that this idea of the two kingdoms in which we are citizens at the same time, that heaven is not just some place we go to after we die, but we already are in a supersensual spiritual connection with all other rational beings, with all beings that can set a purpose. This seems very much influenced by Swedenborg, and even later in his critical time, he's still explicitly naming Swedenborg in a somewhat positive light. In a lecture to his students, he still calls that a sublime thought, a sublime idea of Swedenborg's. So his relationship to him seems to have been a bit more nuanced. And I will talk more about what Kant said about mysticism when I get to his philosophy of religion and to his concept of Aufklärung also. But you could ask if his rejection of all mysticism, of all visions, if that is really philosophical or more so a prejudice of his time, of the 18th century, because there's nothing really in his philosophical system disproving the possibility of such visions. There's also nothing proving it, but clearly when Kant rejects them as not just as unprovable, but when he acts as if they are even impossible, that is not based on his philosophical thinking. That seems more to be, as I said, a prejudice of the 18th century. So I would say that it would be possible to be a Kantian mystic, to believe that mysticism, that mystical visions of the supersensual realm might be possible, while still affirming Kant's philosophy and Kant's critique of reason. But what would be important to be a proper Kantian mystic would be to not take these mystical visions as too important. What really is important is that which we don't just view in some vision, but which we can know. The law, the moral law, the categorical imperative, which we give to ourselves. And even if someone had a vision of a higher supersensual realm, he doesn't need to have that vision to be moral. And on the other hand, he should be careful to not be dragged away from his moral acting by that vision. What really matters to Kant is not that we know the supersensual realm, or that we know what awaits us after death, or if something awaits us after death, but rather what is really important is that we act as good people here in this world. And what that means, I have explained in this lecture and in the previous two. It means, going with what I said in this lecture, going with the third formula of the categorical imperative, acting in such a manner that my will could be universally law-giving to a kingdom of purposes, wanting that which is not just my particular will, but the will of humanity as such, which could serve as the law that is affirmed by every other will of such a kingdom, a harmonious kingdom of purposes. With that, I'm done talking about the categorical imperative as such and about what it demands from us, what actions it demands. But the question of morality is, of course, also about why we act morally, because you could do a good action for bad reasons. And so what I want to address in the next few lectures is what to Kant makes a good person. Because to him a good person is only the person that has a truly good will, that is, a person who does his moral duty for its own sake, simply because it is moral duty, and not, for example, because compassion, pity, and empathy and such feelings compel him to do it. My deep thanks be to my supporters: Thomas Deuringer, Gernot Klaufen, Benjamin Lehning, Oblomov, Ökobong, Samet Özkilic, Elif Özün, Yasin Özün, Alexander Reuter, Lisa Rinner, Ron Suhl, as well as to all others who support me and my aufkläring cause.